What mistakes are stopping you from improving your pronunciation in American English? Hey guys, this is Jeff with Fluent American, and I want to talk with you about why maybe you're not progressing as fast as you would like in your pronunciation, as well as steps you can take today to start improving. And it's going to start immediately with this tip. You need to speak more. There's no secret. The more speaking you do, the faster you'll improve. But you may be wondering, I'm not in a country that speaks English. I don't have people to speak in English with. What are some techniques I can do? Well, firstly, if you find yourself taking language classes, maybe you're taking English classes online, or maybe in the past you were taking them at a language center. I know COVID's kind of changed things a bit, but whatever your situation is, if you have a teacher, one way you can immediately double or more your speaking time is to repeat everything your teacher says. Now, you don't need to say it out loud, super loud. You don't need your teacher necessarily to hear you, but when your teacher says something, or when your teacher is explaining a concept, one technique that you can use to increase your speaking time is to repeat what they're saying, whisper it to yourself. If you're not comfortable speaking, then at least repeat what they're saying in your head, so at least you're kind of getting a little bit of a connection there. Another key strategy that you want to do is shadowing. Shadowing, if you're not familiar, is just repeating what you hear from other people. The goal is to copy the pronunciation, the intonation, and the stress. And if you're not sure about shadowing, or you're not sure what sources to use, we have a 24/7 live stream with constant shadowing videos going on. So definitely check out that. In addition to those things, though, you have opportunities during the day where maybe you can increase your speaking time as well, repeating what you hear. So for instance, if you're in the car, if you're on the subway or the train, or even if you're just doing a chore like washing the dishes or vacuuming, put on your headphones, listen and repeat what you're hearing. These are ways that during the day you can increase the amount of English that you use. Another issue that you may be having with your language learning studying is there's no focus or there's no direction. One day you're doing one thing, the next day you're doing another thing. Maybe you're focusing on vocab one day, focusing on grammar the next. This isn't going to be super productive. If your goal is to target pronunciation, then you need to do focused pronunciation exercises. We've mentioned shadowing exercises before. Another way that you can make shadowing even more focused is to pick a specific topic during different days of the week. So for instance, maybe on Mondays when you shadow, you're going to pay particular attention to the words that are stressed that you hear. So you listen to the speaker and you're going to exaggerate the words that you think they're being stressed. The next day, maybe you're focusing more on thought groups. So instead, you're going to focus on pauses when they're talking. Now, if you're not sure about what stress is and what thought groups are, definitely check out this playlist, which is going to be helpful for you. So again, just by kind of setting little goals for yourself that are all pronunciation related, but focused on different parts of pronunciation. If you're also curious about ways to tie this into other aspects of language learning, like vocabulary, you can also do this. So when you're watching a movie or a show or listening to a podcast, what you can do is set a goal for yourself. Be like, okay, by the end of this movie or by the end of this podcast, I want to find 2 new expressions in English. After you find those expressions, you can then practice the pronunciation of them to make sure that you're saying them correctly. This way, you're focusing not only on pronunciation, but you're also focusing on vocab too. You may be wondering, how do I know how to pronounce it correctly? There are websites, so for instance, youglish.com, you can type in a phrase and then it will show you YouTube videos that have the exact group of words that you want to target. Another challenge that you want to be mindful of is you want to determine who to get feedback from. With pronunciation, it sounds simple. You need to talk to a native speaker, right? Well, not necessarily. Not all native speakers are equal in terms of the quality of the feedback you will receive. The reality is that when you talk to native speakers, they're not really thinking necessarily about the specific mistakes you're making. They may be able to tell that something doesn't sound natural, but they may not be able to tell you why. So that's why having a pronunciation teacher is helpful. A pronunciation teacher can tell you that, oh, you're putting the stress on the wrong word. For instance, if you have a compound noun, like for instance, like a movie ticket, maybe you're saying movie ticket, a movie ticket, but that's the wrong stress. It's a compound noun, so you really should be stressing movie, a movie ticket. Most native speakers don't necessarily know these aspects of pronunciation, so it's not going to be helpful for you. The other thing is that even if a native speaker does know about these aspects of pronunciation, they may not feel comfortable putting themselves in that position of teacher or instructor. You know, if they're your friend or if they're your coworker or if they're your boss, you know, they want to maintain a certain relationship with you. By doing those sorts of corrections, they feel like it can make things awkward or it's not appropriate to make those sorts of comments. So again, just be careful with native speakers. Not all native speakers are going to be equal in terms of the help they can give you. One thing you also want to avoid is perfectionism. And I get it. If you're studying pronunciation, the chances are that you are a perfectionist. You're really trying to get that natural sound. But the reality is that, one, if you're pronouncing words perfectly, there's actually a chance you're sounding less natural. That's because when native speakers talk, the key things are especially stressed words. You want to make sure, in a word you're stressing, that the vowel sound is clear, that it's being held long enough. All the other words kind of fall apart. You can slur them. You can blur some of the consonants and even some of the vowel sounds. Some of the vowel sounds will change completely. You know, in a word, for instance, independent. You know, you don't need to say independent. It's more independent. Notice how many reductions those are. Notice how many vowels are getting reduced into schwa sounds. It's like in the instead of in de. It sounds like that. And the reality is, if you're focusing on pronouncing every syllable perfectly, you're actually achieving the opposite goal. In addition to that, perfectionism can also lead to feeling discouraged. In fact, a lot of people learn languages to a great level, but they never feel comfortable speaking. So what can happen is other people that they know who are actually weaker in the language end up learning faster and improving faster because they're not worried about making mistakes and they're willing to try and use the language. So being a perfectionist when it comes to language learning is a double-edged sword. It's helpful for motivation, but don't let it scare you away. By the way, guys, if you're a perfectionist and you're the type of person that needs everything to be correct, let me know in the comments. There are two final ideas that I just want to touch on that I think can be holding back your pronunciation. The first thing is that you may be assuming that sounds that are alike in your first language and in English are pronounced exactly the same. And the reality is that may not be the case. This is largely because of placement. The mouth position could even be identical, but English has a placement that is low in the throat and relaxed.
What tends to happen in lots of other language groups is the placement's going to be much, much higher.
If you're not sure what I mean by placement, definitely check out this video. But if you're, for instance, pronouncing the E sound, E is a sound that most languages have. But the difference with American English is, again, it's going to be lower in the throat and more relaxed. So instead of doing a sound like E, where I'm really feeling that in my face, my cheeks up here, I really need to be feeling it down here. A. Can you hear a difference there? E versus A. Oftentimes, what my pronunciation students find is that the sounds that are new to them, that don't exist in their own native language, are in some ways easier to master than the sounds that are very similar to their first language. If you're particularly curious about what sounds English has that your first language has too, definitely check out this video. The very last point, and for me as a pronunciation teacher, this is the most frustrating, is that a lot of students don't even start thinking about pronunciation until they're already advanced learners. What's the problem with this? Well, when you're a beginner and you start learning the language, if you don't think about pronunciation, you start creating this system that's based on faulty logic. It has problems. So by the time you get to be an advanced learner, after a year, 2 years, 3 years or more with the language, maybe 20 years or more, you spent that entire time speaking in a way that's not very natural sounding in a native context. And if your desire is to then suddenly change it to become more natural sounding in that environment, well, you now need to work twice as hard, if not more, because you have to unlearn what you've already studied, and then you have to relearn a new system. So it's a lot of work. Whereas if you had studied more pronunciation as a beginner, yes, it will take longer. Yes, it will take more work. Yes, it may mean delaying some of your goals. I know when people learn languages, the first thing they want to do is to talk. I get it. There's nothing wrong with that. But by spending a little bit more time on the pronunciation from the beginning, then you can save yourself some trouble later on when you become more of an advanced speaker. Hey guys, if you're looking for 10 tips that you can use to improve your pronunciation, check out this video.